Radical changes in this year's election have made this one unique from all the rest. We are members of the Simpson debate team, and today we're here to discuss what's more important, cleaning up the language of campaigns or cleaning up their finances.
The search for a Republican candidate for the 2012 election is a perfect example of the negative effects of negative campaigning. Candidates for the Republican nomination each had negative comments about each other, comments that greatly divided an already divided party. Mitt Romney's composure throughout roundtable debates with other possible candidates shined through to grab him the nomination. Upon reflection of this year's campaign, the composure that both candidates once held against attacks is no longer present. In turn, Governor Romney and President Obama are continually losing favor with the most important demographic of this election, the undecided and independent voter. Along with this, negative campaigning creates widespread voter apathy and hinders voter turnout and trust of government. I will address both of these points, giving two examples of the negative consequences of attack ads. This will show why negative campaign ads need to be curbed. First, I will discuss the negative effects of negative campaigning on the undecided voter, and secondly, I will broaden the discussion to discuss the effects of the entire voting population. Research done by a partnership between professors at Rutgers University and the George Washington University shows that voters only truly retain information from a campaign ad if it is negative. In short, negative campaign ads do work. However, defining negative campaign ads as successful means that they only stick around because voters remember the negative information and in turn have a negative feeling towards candidates. For an undecided voter, the demographic that Professor Dennis Goldford of Drake University has identified as this upcoming election's most important demographic, these attack ads only create less political apathy and in turn create minimal independent voter turnout. Essentially, both sides of the campaign are shooting themselves in the foot. Cutting out negative campaign ads, in this instance, will not only benefit each side of the campaign, but it will also create a better atmosphere among voters. This brings me to my second point. The same research project by Rutgers University and the George Washington University illuminates that negative campaign ads lower feelings of political efficacy, trust in government, and a possible overall public mood. With many voters feeling left marginalized by their party or the economy, party platforms are starting to decrease a voters' likeliness to vote. Negative campaign ads contribute to many of the top reasons people choose not to vote. They feel that their vote doesn't matter, or that they feel like they can't connect to or support a candidate. Once again, candidates are shooting themselves in the foot when they publish attack ads. They lose trust and motivation with all voters, and consequently, the possibility of a presidency. In essence, negative campaign ads create a negative mood for all voters, and therefore for their support of government. Negative campaign ads lose the most important voters and decrease the integrity of the two major parties in this year's election.
Viewing today's political issues from a Democratic standpoint, I, among many others, see an enormous problem that is rapidly growing within our political system. This problem would be campaign contributions and the fact that the United States holds no cap on the amount of money an individual or corporation can spend on a certain campaign. But before we can engage in a meaningful discussion about the problems that unlimited contributions can cause, it is first necessary to understand what campaign contributions are. As defined by Webster's Dictionary, campaign contributions are contributions made to a politician, political campaign, or a political party as a voluntary gift. These contributions can be from individuals or corporations alike. Now, as we have established our topic at hand, it is now necessary to address ways in which unlimited contributions negatively impact our nation. The answer has to do with democracy and why we value such a system of government. One of the main ideologies of democracy is the supposition that no single person or group should have more power to make decisions that affect society. In other words, we assume that everybody within a given society should have an equal opportunity to participate in the democratic process of decision-making that affects each other's lives. Now, I'm not advocating that everybody has the same capability to do so, but rather that the opportunity to participate in this decision-making process is equal among all citizens. And so, from this standpoint, allowing those with lopsided financial resources unlimited access to use the resources in their political favor violates the democratic ideals of basic equality. In addition to infringing upon these delicate rights, and unlimited contributions have negatively impacted the nation, according to V. Ransel from Global Research Online. The rich, aided and abetted by the two wings of the money party, have bankrupted the government. The economic crisis is pulling back the curtain of democratic pretense to expose the brick wall of a callous system that ignores the social needs to satisfy the whims of a parasitic, opulent minority. And while the Wall Street has extracted $13 trillion in bailouts just since October of 2008, the thought of raising taxes on the wealthy to pay just $1 trillion over an entire decade for Social Security or health insurance is deemed a crisis that would lead Wall Street to shut down the economy. Wall Street is demanding that governments around the world make up for the extravagance of their financial sector by taking what little they left to their victims through higher taxes and slashing or eliminating social programs. Now, we see examples of political parties catering towards the rich all the time. Why? Because if politicians fail to bend their policies towards the aspirations of their donors, then their money flow simply stops flowing. Thus, because there are no caps to campaign contributions, the rich allow their money to do the talking for them and their own interests, as politicians are reliant on their support. Thus, the solution: we must revert back to a time when there were more regulations on campaign spending. We must go back to a time before the 2010 Supreme Court ruling between Citizens United and the FEC, where the Supreme Court ruled that capping contributions was a violation of freedom of speech. We need to realize that the only ideals being heard are the basic ideals of democracy and equality, as everyone's voice is not equally heard, nor is it equally represented. Obviously, as we live in a capitalistic society, taking the money out of politics is impossible, and it's not even necessarily completely desirable. However, that does not mean that we should not strive for such a goal or strive for a nation in which everyone's voice can be equally represented. The first step in achieving such a goal is to put a cap on campaign contributions.
So my first question is if you're going to look at the idea of equality within the democracy that you defined, how can you say that capping campaigns is going to help fix the equality? Because if you look at the ruling of the case that you listed in there, what they were basically saying is that everybody really does have that equal opportunity because there are PACs, super PACs, and grassroots movements. And
Okay, but what you're going to see here is that political campaigns are actually reliant on fundraising from other types of sources like individuals and corporations. And because they're actually reliant on this money, they're going to aid and bend their policies towards these specific people. So what we can see here is that though everybody can go out and vote, the specific policies that politicians actually cater towards individuals are specifically catered towards this opulent minority. Now I have a question for you. Aren't we actually going to be losing more voters at the point in which an opulent minority runs our country?
well, when you want to look at it at that point, you're losing more voters if you were taking away from independent voters. The independent voters are really the ones that decide an election, especially in this election. And so if you're going to be having negative campaign ads, you're pushing them away, and then in turn you might be giving an opportunity to a campaign that is strong in their negative campaigning, but might not necessarily have the majority. The true majority might be hiding because they're afraid to vote. Now my next question for you is, if you want to look at what the United States democracy really is, it's a majoritarian democracy, where there are large groups that represent individual ideas. And recently, those large groups have become super PACs. And not all super PACs are made up of necessarily the richest and the most business-savvy people. There are a lot of grassroots super PACs as well. And so if you're going to look at the majoritarian point of view, where the majority is represented by a large group representing popular opinions, then how are you saying it's not democratic and that there isn't equal representation?
Well, I mean, if you looked at your point of view from perfect utopia, then, I mean, there might possibly be equal representation, but we have to look to the status quo and see that that's simply not happening. Basically, because of what B. Ransel writes in the speech I just presented, we see all these different policies that are catered towards the specific rich individuals. Like there's been a bunch of bailouts that weren't necessarily good for the majority of the country, but were good for just an opulent minority that actually, that the politicians had to cater their policies towards to keep their money flowing. And you can also look to, there's a specific example of an aspartame factory in New Mexico that the majority of the public, because of the negative harms of aspartame, wanted to shut down, but then somebody used their money to lobby, and actually this decision was overturned. So you can clearly see that the majority is being hurt at the point in which money is doing the talking for just a few individuals. Now, I have a question for you. Looking to your Rutgers study that you bring up within your speech that says negative campaign ads help voters retain information, how would we expect voters to vote if they can't retain information otherwise?
I think that you need to look at the fact that you can all negative campaign ads thrive off of shooting information at you quickly because the average American citizen does not have a very large attention span, and you can be just as equally successful with getting information across by shooting it at somebody very quickly with lots of facts. Now, the only kind of campaign ad that does that right now is a negative campaign ad. It can be very easily turned around to have the negative campaign ads be those long, drawn out ones that you see, which is now like what a positive campaign ad is. So if you basically flip it and make a positive campaign ad that fast-moving pace where somebody will retain that information, and make a negative campaign ad that slow-moving one, or completely cutting them, as I'm suggesting, that's a way you can retain information as a voter. So my next question for you is, if you're taking this idea of capping campaign ads to get rid of equality, you're saying that there's a minority that's controlling the government right now because of this campaign finances. How are you going to justify the idea of equality if you're taking away their right their right to contribute to a campaign and not taking away that opportunity from a small individual?
But you see, in fact, we're not actually taking away their right. By capping campaign contributions, that doesn't mean that individuals or corporations aren't allowed to donate money towards specific campaigns. It just means that there's a certain cap on the amount of money that they can actually donate. So their voices are going to be heard. They can donate to whatever campaign they like, but in turn, they're not going to be running the country, and so that allows for everybody's voice to be heard. When addressing the issues of today's debate, we can clearly see that negative campaign ads aren't necessarily the worst issue in regards to this year's political discourse. Now, we can see this for the following reasons. The first of which is going to be this idea of the watchdog effect, and the fact that we must have these negative campaign ads to make sure that parties aren't abusing their power and hiding things from the public. Now, we can't do this without pointing out the specific flaws within each candidate's or party's specific policies. So we have to have these negative campaign ads to do so. But furthermore, they specifically allow for the clash between candidates. Now, making negative things that each candidate does aware to the public will actually increase awareness and allow for greater and further discussion on televised debates. An example, like if I don't know that Romney pays less taxes through the negative campaign ads, then I won't ask questions about his specific tax policies. It's as specific as that, and that's something that I would like to know as a voter before I went and cast my ballot in November. Now, third, as my opponent said, campaign ads work. They give voters a cause. Now, she tries to say that this is actually going to lower trust, but this simply could not be further from the truth. Now, there will always be trust issues between different parties. That's why they're in different parties, because they have different intentions for our country and different ideologies. But what you're not going to see is this idea of voter turnout actually decreasing. She says that voter turnout is going to decrease, but that's not true because, one, negative campaign ads actually get people fired up and wanting to vote and wanting to learn because they get them excited about a cause. Now, we can see that, if anything, unlimited amount of campaign contributions is actually going to decrease turnout because the majority can see that their voice isn't actually being heard as an opulent minority is allowed to run the country. And furthermore, she also said that these negative campaign ads actually help people retain more information. People aren't going to go out and vote if information isn't retained. They're not going to go out and vote because they have no reason to. But furthermore, we can look to this idea towards, why vote if your voice isn't being heard over the clanging of coins and money bags? There's simply no reason for the majority to go out and vote. Now, what we can see here is that the real issue in today's debate is capping campaign contributions because it is the only way to protect democracy. Now, what we need to see here is that, can we actually look democracy in the eyes in today's debate and say that it's at its finest? No, we cannot, and why? Because an opulent minority is actually being able to run our country with the lopsided resources that they have. I brought up two specific examples in today's debate where an opulent minority and rich people have actually been able to influence political decisions. Now, look to all the bailouts that have hurt our economy and that were catered towards the rich. Our government doesn't care about anybody else because they receive money from these types of people. Thus, we must put a cap on campaign contributions to restore democracy back to its glory days. Thank you.
My opponent is saying that democracy is reliant upon equal opportunity to participate and be heard. Isn't a campaign contribution the very essence of being able to participate? Everybody has the opportunity to contribute to a campaign. If you want to look at it from a majoritarian point of view, this really is the essence of democracy. And with the ruling of the case that she brought up in her speech, you're looking at the fact that everybody has that equal free right of speech, and everybody has the opportunity to do it regardless of how much money they're contributing. And that capping campaign contributions is not constitutional because you are limiting their right of speech and everybody's equal opportunity to participate. In this election, that's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue really is that this election will be decided by those individual voters that may be turned away by negative campaign ads. Our country is losing its true essence of democracy to negative campaign ads because people feel that they cannot be heard, that they don't have an influence in the campaign, and that they don't trust the government. Negative campaign ads must be curbed, and that voters need to be informed through other means. This is beneficial to both parties and the government as a whole, especially in this year's election.